Welcome to Talk Moto, the show where we explore the thrill of the open road and the adventures that wait around every corner. And today we're diving into a two-wheel journey like no other. I recently embarked on a tour of the Emerald Island by motorcycle, and it was nothing short of spectacular. From the lush landscapes to spectacular coastlines and the warm hospitality of the Irish people, I'll take you on a virtual ride through this captivating land. So grab your helmet, rev up your engines and join me as I share the tales of my Irish motorcycle adventure on this special episode. Let's do it. The United Kingdom offers a vast array of motorcycle roads and routes worthy of touring, each offering unique and beautiful landscapes, so the choice largely depends on your own personal preferences. You may choose to go up to Scotland, and you could hit the North Coast 500 or NC 500 as it's more famously known. For its stunning coastal scenery and remote landscapes, Glencore's another one for its dramatic mountain scenery, and it's a great choice for hikers and outdoor enthusiasts, not forgetting of course us bikers. Or perhaps you'd prefer to stay more central. You've got the Peak District or the Yorkshire Dales in England, offering picturesque countryside and rolling hills with charming villages. You've got the Brecon Beacons in Wales, which provide a mix of mountains and valleys that are ideal for exploring on two wheels, as well as Snowdonia. It's home to the highest peak in Wales and England, Mount Snowdon. So whilst Ayr, the Republic of Ireland, or Southern Ireland, however you refer to it, isn't actually part of the UK but an island within its own right, as well as part of Europe, it's only a 3.5 hour ferry crossing from mainland Wales, and it boasts a route that sets it in a league of its own. I am of course talking about the Wild Atlantic Way. So the Wild Atlantic Way in Ireland is not only the world's largest defined coastal route at 1,600 miles or 2,600 kilometres in length, but it's also one of the most beautiful motorcycle touring drives. So what's the big deal for bikers? Well, there's plenty of routes along the way that offer breathtaking views of rugged coastlines, cliffs, beaches, dramatic landscapes, and it's a visually appealing journey. If there's a few of you doing it, there's a sense of camaraderie amongst bikers who share this journey that makes it a popular choice for group rides, or you may just wish to do it on your own. The Wild Atlantic Way features plenty of winding and challenging roads that are perfect for biking enthusiasts who enjoy thrills of navigating twists and turns. The routes that will take you through varied terrains from flat coastal areas to mountainous regions, providing diverse riding experiences. There's a sense of adventure that comes with riding along the Wild Atlantic Way, exploring some of the less travelled and more remote parts of Ireland. There's plenty of points along the way that riders can explore charming villages, historic sites and experience Irish culture, including traditional music and local cuisine, or as we'll find out later on, as one of the lads called it, diddly-dee bands. Winding coastal roads and varying terrain and weather conditions provide an exciting challenge for bikers, but to be honest I wouldn't say that any of it was taxing for any new riders out there wanting to take this on. We were actually quite fortunate in the time that we were there that the weather was fairly good to us. I think that out of the 5 or 6 days of our actual tour we only had one day where it rained, and even then it wasn't severe, to the point where the rain gear that I actually took, which just comprised of a set of over trousers and an over jacket rain type affair, I didn't even end up using them. I'd taken my textiles with me and they were enough for the days that it was a little bit overcast. For the majority of the time though, I just had my riding jeans and my textile jacket, and I was perfectly fine, warm enough. The route's filled with hidden gems, as they'd like to class them as. Charming villages, historic sites and unique local attractions that make it the journey a rewarding one, and especially if you're somebody that likes to go off the beaten track a little bit. And it's something that I think now that I've done it, I've got a little bit of a taste for touring, and I've got a few plans for next year and kind of moving forward of places that I want to explore just in the UK. I know there's plenty of places in Europe that you can go, but I think just having a taste of something that's quite local, if you want to class it as that. I know Ireland's not exactly local, but I suppose to the rest of mainland UK it is. It's not like you're having to travel down and travel across Europe, as my mate and one of the guys that was on the trip have done this year. They've done a couple of weeks down into Spain on the bikes. There's plenty of accessible places in this country that you can go. As I've already mentioned, there's places like Scotland, Wales, tons of places in England itself, as well as going back over to Ireland. And even if you've only got 2 or 3, 4 days in which to do that, you're not really going to get round much of Europe in that space of time, but there's plenty of places that you can do in this country. So I'm not going to rule that out just yet. But I think in summary, the Wild Atlantic Way in Ireland, it's a significant route for bikers because it offers an exceptional combination of natural beauty and challenging riding conditions. Always pack for rain when you go over there. I think we were lucky the time of year that we went in that we did get quite a good week of weather, cultural experiences, and just an opportunity to form lasting memories on the open road, especially if there's a few of you. It's a dream destination for some riders looking to combine their love of motorcycling with exploration and adventure, and I think that's exactly what we achieved when we went over there. And to be fair, I think we got less than 50% round the Wild Atlantic Way, looking back on it. So I think at some point in the near future, I'm going to be going back and trying to do it all. I think looking at it, you need a good 14 days-ish to be able to cover it all from one end to the other and take it all in. I think the problem is with the Wild Atlantic Way, there's so many points that you can stop off and just take in where you actually are and the scenery. We did a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the bits that we went to. Every time we had a stop off at one of the marker points, we were only there for 10-15 minutes max, and it would have been nice to have got around more of the stop off points and just take a little bit more of that in and appreciate it a little bit more. So I suppose the main point of this is, how did I end up coming to go and do a tour, my first tour if you like, on the Wild Atlantic Way in Ireland? Well, when it comes to doing any sort of tour, especially on a bike, planning is key. The route you're going to take, the gear you want to take with you, maintenance of your bike, they're all key elements that you need to consider and have covered, especially for somewhere like an isolated country route like Ireland has to offer. I didn't do any of this, well, almost none of it. So my story starts that I'm having a beer with one of the guys that I go out riding with, and he tells me that a few of the lads that he drinks with, who are also bikers, they're planning on going to Ireland on a bit of a tour. Did I want to go with them? It's a 5 or 6 day tour of Ireland on the bikes with a bunch of guys that I only knew one of. So being the adventurous and spur of the moment kind of guy that I am, naturally I was well up for it. I had no idea what gear I'd need, where we were going to be heading, any of the routes or anything, or more importantly, if this is even going to fit in with my personal life. I'd not even considered what my wife and sons were planning on doing the week that they were going, but the sheer thought of actually going on a tour on my Triumph Tiger with my mate and a bunch of guys who I'd never even met before, I found it quite exciting and I wanted in. I had no idea how much it was going to cost, but as it turned out, it wasn't as expensive as I'd thought. It wasn't like going on a package holiday. All I was going to need money for were fuel, lodgings, food, and of course some proper Guinness. So after the initial shock of what have I just signed myself up for, I managed to speak to the missus and she was okay with it. After all, it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission. So as we're getting closer to the departure date, I start getting excited as well as a bit apprehensive and a little bit panicky. What if my bike breaks down? Does my insurance cover me to ride in Southern Ireland? I didn't have any panniers. I just had a 55 litre top box. So how am I going to get all my kit in it? How much clothing and kit am I actually going to need? Would I need any bike security? There were just questions. As it turns out, the majority of those questions were nothing more than inexperience, really. I've never done a big tour like this. And after all, up until now, my only experience of touring had been a weekend away at Santa Pod drag strip with a couple of guys who I also went to Farmyard Rally with in this country. I don't see them anymore, and they were just literally a couple of days camping, beer, rides. Even the rides weren't that exciting. But I consider myself older, wiser, and more laid back in my approach and expectation to these things and events. So the fact that riding around for 5 or 6 days with a bunch of guys, the majority of whom turned out to be older than me and definitely more experienced at touring, not to mention more travelled on two wheels than I am, I was happy to just be a tag along and go with the flow. They'd organised the routes, the stopping locations, and more importantly, where we were going to stay. So I spent the weeks running up to the departure date researching, reading and watching videos and riding the Wild Atlantic Way on YouTube. Not that any of this had any relevance, as I'd be following the other lads anyway, but I knew I was in for something special. The only caveat to this was the high possibility of rain, something that Ireland is never short of, and one of the main reasons it's known as the Emerald Isle. So heed that warning. For anyone planning on riding the Wild Atlantic Way, the recommendation is take plenty of rain gear with you. Landing in Dublin and riding to the southwest to start the route just east of Kinsale at Fort Charlie at the southern end of Ireland and travelling north along the coastal roads. Luckily, the entire Wild Atlantic Way route signposted with brown road signs with the unmissable WAW direction wording. There's plenty of routes on the net that you can follow or download. Loads of recommendations for hotels and B&Bs to stop at. More than enough viewpoints to stop and take in the sights from the many coastal cliffs and roads overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. I think the main reason it's recommended that you ride south to north is simply that we ride on the left-hand side of the road and the coast runs up the left. But in reality, as we found, riding north to south, it didn't make a right lot of difference, to be honest, and the views were just as impressive. The route that we took was to ride from Dublin after disembarking the ferry at Holyhead in Wales to head northwest in a more or less diagonal line up through Enniskillen, Donegal, and then on to our first base for 2 nights, the Bridge Inn at Dunglow, or Dunglow as we were calling it. Our trip actually started the previous day, as the journey from West Yorkshire down to Holyhead in Wales was going to be around 2.5–3 hours with a coffee and toilet stop on the way. And as our ferry departed at 9 a.m. on the Thursday morning, we needed to be there an hour before, so that it meant us setting off at around 4:30 in the morning, which we didn't really fancy that. So we rode down the night before. So me and my mate set off at around 5–6 o'clock on Wednesday tea time and stopped a few miles down the road at Hartshead Services on the M62 westbound and waited for the others who made up the rest of the group. Exchanged introductions, as my mate turned out, he only knew a couple of the lads, and then we set off down to Wales. We'd booked to stay at the Travel Lodge in Holyhead, so the ride down was pretty relaxed and a bit boring as well, really, because a lot of it was motorway riding. We weren't running to a time spec either, so there was no kind of pressure on us to get there. The first hour and a half was dull. It was mainly motorway riding until we hit the Welsh border A roads, and then it was country roads all the way to Holyhead with some spectacular Welsh coastal scenery to enjoy. We arrived in Holyhead at around 9–9:30 p.m, locked up our bikes, dumped our gear in the hotel, and then headed out for a beer or two before calling it a night. So early next morning, and we're up and ready to roll and hit the ferry terminal for about 8 o'clock. It's only a 3-mile ride from where we were staying to the actual ferry terminal, so it probably took us longer to get all our gear on the bike and put us kit on than it did to actually get there. So after boarding the ferry and strapping our bikes down, which is another experience if you've never encountered this one, you're directed to a designated area on the ferry for motorcycle parking and given a rubber pad to put over your bike seat so that the ratchet straps that you strap your bike down with don't mark your seat. It's quite clever, really. We then had a wander upstairs for a brew and an overly inflated breakfast and sat around for our 3.5-hour crossing over to Dublin. It's a long time since I've been on a ferry, and if my memory serves me correctly, I think my last experience, I must have been about 10 years old when we went to the Isle of Man with my parents and my younger brother. Sadly not to the Isle of Man TT, so I'd forgotten how slow a crossing it is considering it's only a little over 70 miles from Holyhead to Dublin. And I actually looked this up. Ferries only travel at around 25 miles an hour. That's how bored we were on our crossing. So we docked in Dublin just after lunch and headed north and clipped the tail end of Northern Ireland through Enniskillen before emerging and stopping in Donegal for a brew, before pressing on further north to Dunglow. Now, Dunglow is every bit the Irish village that you'd expect. Brightly painted buildings and shops with a few pubs and cafes dotted around, and of course our digs for 2 nights, the Bridge Inn. It looked small from the outside, so I wasn't expecting it to be the size it was once we were inside. We parked and secured our bikes around the back of the building and unloaded our bikes. The back had an extension built onto it, so it was no surprise really that the inside was nothing short of a TARDIS. We had 2 rooms booked. I'd never looked at the other one, but ours had a double bed and 3 single beds, a kitchenette lounge area and a huge bathroom. What more could 4 biker blokes need? A quick shower and a change of clothing, and we were out for a few beers at the local before calling it a night in preparation for our first day out. So the next couple of days were perfect. The weather was remarkably kind to us, the sun graced us with its presence, and the scenery was out of this world. I think we only had one day where it drizzled a bit, so I think we did quite well considering. I was expecting rain in preparation for this. I'd borrowed my brother's 2-piece over trousers and jacket, but as it turned out, these never came out of the bag. We experienced rolling hills, open fields, stretches of water and lakes galore, mountain passes. Ireland has it all. We headed north for the first day and stopped at Fanad Head Lighthouse and Visitor Centre, and I even got a chance to get the drone out and fly over the lighthouse itself. There were a few more opportunities to fly it, but they were brief as our stops were only about 15 minutes, so we didn't want to be slowing the day up really. The decision whether to stop and take photos or shoot the bulk of any journey on an action camera such as a GoPro or similar is a tough one. I personally like the thoughts of being able to capture and document something like a trip to Ireland and be able to play it back at a later date, as well as uploading it to the likes of YouTube or the Book of Face, so my lads can watch it, or anyone for that matter. But how far do you go? Being the tech head that I am, naturally I took my drone, my GoPro, my 360 camera and I used them all. I kind of worked a few ideas around how I'd capture the majority of the footage I took, the GoPro at least, in that I didn't just set it off going every day and record every minute of the ride. I set it to shut off and only come on when I hit the record button. That way it preserves the battery life. I actually use a power bank on the majority of the time when I've got my GoPro out. So they hold a lot more charge in the battery and you can run it continuously. If you hit the record button at certain points when there's nothing happening, you can just turn it on and off and then turn it back on if there's something interesting going on. The scenery is a bit nondescript, or you simply think this is going to be a bit of a dull one to watch back. The camera just stops recording and shuts itself off. It's quite clever really. But I've taken to using it this way from now on for most of my vlogs, but that's a conversation for a different podcast. There's not a lot else I can tell you that you can't imagine from this tour. A load of lads, miles of riding, good times and laughs, but generally plenty of time with nothing but my own thoughts and my headset playing various music tracks of choice. The Guinness in Ireland's definitely better than that you get over here in the UK, but as we found, you can still get a difference between the pubs over here and found some of the Guinnesses were creamier than others. The second stopover of our trip saw us ride back down south through Donegal, Sligo, west to Ballina in County Mayo. Now, like a lot of Brits, I'll happily admit and be proud to boast my Irish heritage, but unlike some, I've actually been to Ballina a few years back with my parents, as it's the birthplace of my grandma, and still have a few cousins that live there, but sadly this was a fleeting visit purely for a fuel up and a coffee stop before heading to our second digs in Westport, which was a private house one of the lads ended up booking last minute through an Airbnb, I think, either an Airbnb or booking.com, I forget which one it was, but we ended up booking a private bungalow that slept 11 and was located on a residential street. Definitely in need of a decor update, but it had hot water and comfy beds, so it did us perfect. Now, my bike spends 99% of its life parked up in my garage when I'm not riding it, so again, having to leave it locked up outside proper stresses me out, especially with motorcycle theft in the UK being so rife as it is at the minute. As it turned out, everything was fine with bikes chained together and locked and dislocked and everything. I wonder if any of the locals in the street were thinking, this is Westport, lads. We don't have that issue here. Who knows? We used this as our stay for the next 2 nights, but not before heading west and over to Achill Island. Now, I'd never heard of Achill Island until I was informed by one of the lads that it was where the film The Banshees of Inisherin was shot. It's a stunning place, especially viewed from 2 wheels, with tall cliffs and stunning beaches, but windy as hell and home to only around 2,500 people and tons of sheep. You can ride the entire road network in about an hour, if not less, but it's definitely worth a visit. On our last day, we headed east back towards Dublin for the ferry back to Holyhead. Pretty much uneventful, really, but again, the ride back to the ferry was fairly straightforward and pleasant enough, and the crossing seemed to take longer. I think it's always the case when you're going home from anywhere, you just want to get home, so any journey home on something like a ferry or a plane, it just seems to drag. The ride back through Wales reminded me that you don't have to leave the UK to find some scenic marvels, and the rolling valleys and hills along the A55 through Anglesey in North Wales back to Chester are well worth a trip in themselves. A couple more coffee and toilet stops on the way home and we arrived back in Yorkshire for just after 9 o'clock at night. Tired and filled with memories of a fantastic trip on 2 wheels with a bunch of spot-on lads who I hope to venture out with again someday. In fact, my mate has just come back from a 2-week trip to Spain with one of the lads off the trip, and I've yet to catch up with him on that one. I'll definitely be back to Ireland again, but I've also had a look at a few other options in this country, including the lakes and Scotland. A couple of the lads on a trip I recall mentioned that they thought Ireland was better than their Scotland trip that they'd done a few years back. But then this debate soon had a swing of opinion when they were started trying to compare the wild Atlantic way to the Scottish Highlands with Glencoe and the Cairngorms. I may have to try Scotland at some point and make my own decision on that one. My brother's a biker and he's done Scotland a few times and absolutely loves it. There is actually a 4-day Scottish tour called the Crieff Cloverleaf I wouldn't mind trying. It's 4 individual full-day tours which all start and finish from Scotland's tourist hub of Crieff. In fact, if you put Crieff Cloverleaf into Google, the first site that pops up is at www.cloverleaf.scot and contains everything that you'll need to know about the areas and routes, including links to download the GPX files that you can then upload to your sat-nav or phone app. According to their site, the routes promise to offer something for every biker, from sweeping progressive A roads to winding country byways and adventurous single tracks, travelling through the northern alpine Cairngorms and the southern rolling hills of the borders. Curving around dramatic west coast mountain locks and east coast seaside vistas, the Crieff Cloverleaf brings you plenty of the best of Scotland's biking in every direction. Sounds thrilling. Right, let's wrap this show up. Thanks for listening. Please feel free to drop us an email with any questions, suggestions, likes or dislikes, or if you just want to get in touch. Our email address is in the link below. It's talkmotouk@gmail.com. Ride safe, and I'll catch you on the next show.